Laurie Weitzel, will you set some context for us? I have been reading the Cannabis Legislation and Regulation in British Columbia discussion paper. I read it's 8 pages with the cover. I read all of it, and I dutifully noted and outlined. It came for me down to avoid normalizing, which sounded a great deal like a prim, I come out of a very Protestant background, Puritan kind of avoid normalizing marijuana, non-medical marijuana, and eliminate illegal markets. Now that didn't seem to me to be what I thought in June 2018 legalizing non-medical marijuana was going to be about. And I know that your business is medical marijuana. So can you kind of, in lay speak, what's going on here?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure that I can answer that.
Give me some hints.
We're slowly receiving information from the government on how the transition is taking place.
Now, are you talking the federal government or the provincial government?
Both. So there's different aspects and different layers depending on what we're specifically speaking about and who controls that. So essentially, let's just say right now we are medicinal. Mm-hmm. We are an unregulated business at this point until it becomes legalized. Mm. And we carry a multitude of medicinal products.
All of them cannabis-based.
All of them cannabis-based, yes. And the current process for that is you have to have a doctor's note from a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner. And you can come into our store with that documentation. And as long as you've got basically a medical diagnosed issue, then you can purchase medicinal cannabis.
And you're called a dispensary.
We're called a dispensary, yes.
Kimberly sort of stepped out boldly and licensed dispensaries, 2 of them, of which yours is one. Yes. First in the province. Mm-hmm. And I was a little surprised. I thought it was remarkably level-headed to do that.
And that all was about medicinal cannabis.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get to be the either lucky person or the fortunate person or the person committed to serving the community to be one of those dispensaries?
So my late husband, Chris, was diagnosed with cancer and very late in stages. And he was given a prognosis of 9 months. And, you know, when you hear that, it's just unfathomable. You know, he was 46 at the time. Mm. And you do whatever you can to change that. And we had a client, we had another business in town, and we had a client come in and say that her mom had lung cancer. And she was living down in the States. And she was reading about Rick Simpson, who is a Canadian fellow living in the East. And he had cured his own cancer by a cannabis oil extract. And so she basically came back in the summer and told us that her mom was doing very well on the cannabis. And by that fall, her lungs were clear. And so the following January is when my husband was diagnosed, and we had no idea, you know, what cannabis would do from a health perspective. So we decided that we were more natural anyway. We wanted to take more of a natural path, and we tried the oil extract. And so, you know, Chris got on it, and at that time we didn't have a dispensary to go to. So we went to the black market and basically brought our flower bud and took it all into the shop and started creating that oil extract. And it's about a 5-hour process. It can be highly dangerous because it's highly flammable. Mm-hmm. And my husband was a millwright, so you know, we set up very safely. but I'm sure those those that have tried it before may not have been as safe, which is a bit of a concern with what's coming up. But anyways, he with some other things, with some other natural. Well, we went down to a cancer hospital and got some help there. And anyways, we extended his life in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And it was actually a 9-week lesson on how do you live your life. And, you know, they taught us that sickness happens, you know, between the 5 inches between your ears. And it was an amazing experience. It really was an amazing experience. And so we changed our whole life. We really did. And adopted it and moved forward with it. And, you know, we were able to give him an extra year on top of that 9 months, which was amazing. And, you know, he went from not being able to walk from the kitchen to the living room. I had to, when we went to the hospital, he was in a wheelchair. He had lost 80 pounds. He was very weak. And when we came back from the hospital, he had a lot of strength and he had a lot of quality. He loved his motorcycle, put 20,000 kilometers on his motorcycle that summer. And so it was very good. So just a few months prior to when he ultimately passed away, we went to the city council and we spoke to them about our experience and what was happening. And we asked for a business license because Chris ultimately wanted to open a cannabis store, to pay it forward and to talk to people and educate the community on what the benefits were and how we could help others. And so it was unfortunate that, well, just before I say that, so the council unanimously agreed to give us a business license.
Powerful story.
Yes. And so, and just right after that, it took a turn for the worst, and we were unable to open at that time. And so my business partner and I, after Chris passed away, the end of November in 2015, we decided that we were going to, in Chris's honor, open a dispensary together and, you know, go back to educating and helping others. And it's been a wonderful experience. You know, when I talk to people, I don't feel like I work. I feel like, you know, like you two, we're having a discussion, and it's amazing. And the stories that I hear and the feedback that I hear from cannabis is just, it makes my day every day. And it's a way that I've been able to heal also.
We don't learn from the good times, we learn from the hard times.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
So it was convincing to a small town in British Columbia to say, yeah, we're gonna be part of the future, not the past. This isn't all about prohibition.
No.
This is opening some doors. Well, how does the leap from...
This is all about to change in some way.
It is.
The legal structure, and effectively what it appears is happening from the outside is that the federal government is acknowledging that reality, that large numbers, 20+% of Canadians are using cannabis in some way.
that was non-medicinal.
Well, the numbers, I mean, not everybody fesses up.
No, that's true.
But it's apparently somewhere in that range.
A lot of people.
And this is happening all over the
people.
world. It's
And
not
this
just
is-
Canada.
This is a reality check, isn't it?
It is.
Which, frankly, and it's part of why I'm interested in it. Your story is sort of a significant manifestation of it, but the whole world seems to be acknowledging that maybe prohibition is not the way to deal with, particularly something that, by all accounts, is less lethal than, say, alcohol, less destructive than alcohol, and lots of other things going on with it. So the actions of the federal government, to me, seem like an exercise in acknowledging reality and then trying to cope with it in some way. The question then becomes, what is the way that they choose? How does How does the implementation start? What happens after that? Is there a learning process? Are we stuck with what comes down now, or are we going to? Is it going to evolve?
Well, it's going to evolve. I believe it. It has to evolve, and our population will speak out, and so I have faith in that. In BC, it's a mature cannabis culture, and
This goes back 40 years at
it
least.
does, absolutely, and
And when you say mature, people are accustomed to growing it, they're accustomed to selling it, they're accustomed to using it, that kind of mature?
yes, absolutely.
And it's like, no big
It's one of
deal?
our biggest industries. I mean, it's far
In
greater
BC?
than fisheries and forestry, and bigger than wine and beer, 3 or 4 times the revenue.
And this is a worldwide market.
This is this is the market in BC. I mean, we're world renowned, and anywhere you go, you can mention BC Bud, and they'll know.
You're not talking about your brother-in-law.
That's right. So the federal government is writing regulations for the entire nation,
And that's not a mature audience?
well, the thing is, BC, they're saying that we're 20 years ahead of the other provinces. And by these regulations, we are going to go back 20 years, which is really unfortunate. And I know that we'll get there, but it's hard. It's hard to take. The regulations that are coming out, basically my biggest concerns with them is product diversity. And I'm very concerned about my community and the members that use medical cannabis, that they will not be able to access the products that they need for their medicine.
Medical diversity, what's that mean?
Well, the product diversity means that they are allowing us to sell as a retail outlet flower or bud, same thing, and a low-dose oil. So, I have a client that's got cerebral palsy, and he vapes, and there's a very potent shatter oil that he uses, and he will not be able to get that in the regulated market. So basically what he needs it for is he's bound to a wheelchair. He doesn't really have a lot of dexterity in his hands, fingers, and so he has it basically tied around his wrist, and he kind of flips it up, and when he's experiencing that excruciating pain just before he passes out, which happens, he'll have a puff on his vape pen, and all of a sudden the pain subsides. And so basically what that allows is it reduces the morphine intake for him, as well as gains independence from his caregiver. And so...
And besides, it makes him feel better.
Makes him feel better. And, when he first tried it, he told us that he hadn't slept since 1983. So the federal government is saying that they're 5 years out from medical. So we are going to be recreational, and we'll handle those 2 products. We'll be buying from licensed producers, which are very large and big business. And my other concern is the economic state of our rural communities. So
say more about that.
So right now, the government will be able to sell in public stores and retail. They've allowed both, but they'll have public stores. There'll be the online retail space. We are not, as a retail store, allowed to sell online. And there'll be distribution. So they've got 3 areas of revenue, all which will go back to Victoria. It will not stay in our areas. So, right now the small craft growers, they grow, they hire people, they buy products locally, they spend their money locally, and that's all throughout BC. So that layer, is going, and I have a feeling it's going to impact our area a great deal.
It's at the very least at risk.
It is at risk.
I have lots of concerns about this. Part of the challenge, what you said early on, British Columbia has a long history, a lot of experience, has created a, let's call it a gray market for, just to be polite, that apparently is functioning very well.
It is, and it's meeting demands.
It's meeting demand. Local people are behaving responsibly. I have not seen any evidence that there is substantial criminal involvement in the process if you accept the fact that this is not criminal behavior.
That's right.
If, I mean, just the from grower to user, if you take that out of the equation, that there's not a lot of illegal activity outside of that. That is to say, organized crime.
That's right.
That certainly seems to be the case here. I don't know about Vancouver, but it no, go
Well, that
ahead.
does concern
It's-
people.
it
The
does.
gang and the mob in anything that is labeled a drug, that's a real and authentic concern.
I was digging through, thinking about this, trying to get a little background because this is all sort of a new idea. And there was one report that, on the subject of crime, that the people who deal with these kinds of things looked at all the cases that had come up in the last 10 or 20 years, and of those, the numbers were minuscule. Does that match what you know, what you've seen?
Yes, yes. Through Justice Canada, they evaluated over 500 cases, and only 5% were suspicious of organized crime. And there was no convictions. So we're otherwise law-abiding citizens.
And that's the whole business of cannabis, is otherwise law-abiding.
Law-abiding citizens. You
Well-
know, some of our suppliers, I mean, they live and breathe cannabis. That's what they do. They love growing. They love the plant. And they're just so involved with that. And that's what it is. It's a passion. It's a cannabis culture.
The other challenge, well, there's several challenges. The economic piece I want to spend a little time on because that, to me, is the biggest single threat, maybe, in British Columbia. But the other part of this is again, digging through, I came across something that looked like, if you extrapolated the numbers and sort of rearranged them, that about 5% of the cannabis sold is sold legally, in some sense quasi-legally, presumably through medical establishments like yours, which leaves another 95% that is outside of that market.
That's a lot
Obviously,
of money.
this law will change that. The question is how much of that 95% is going to be brought into, let us call it the mainstream, and how much is going to remain where it's been for a long time. And I say that because my concern is, and this comes out of my experience, our experience in the United States, where we've had a war on drugs going on for decades that is basically a war on brown people that has been destructive. It has destroyed lives, families, communities. It's destroyed nations. It is a consequence of having very rigid laws very rigorously enforced. And I think it's a long shot because I'd like to believe Canadians are a little smarter about these kinds of things. But I worry about people who have been living in this gray zone being forced into what will be treated as criminal behavior. And it seems that whether that happens or not is going to be a function of how this policy is structured and how it's implemented.
Well, currently, there's framework around the licensed producers, which are the large producers reporting into Health Canada. And they're talking about micro-licensing, but there's nothing coming down from the government thus far to have them incorporated into that framework. And this is our concern, because if you look at the other areas in the U.S., like Oregon, California, Colorado, they're very inclusive, and they have taken their current framework and brought it into the new regulated system, and it's worked very well. Whereas Washington has not done that, and we're following that same suit. And the unregulated market still survives and thrives in that state.
And so now you have a new area of people at risk?
So what we're wanting to do to change that is have a voice. And so Earth's Own, our dispensary, belongs to an association called Canadian Association of Medical Dispensaries. Medical cannabis dispensaries. CAMCD, let's talk about that. Way easier. And so they are advocating for small business, so our dispensaries, and small growers and producers. And so what we're trying to do is have a voice so that people understand in our communities what is at stake and what is the economic impact that we have. And earlier I spoke about, the small growers, they hire local people, they spend their money locally, and what is going to happen with that.
Well, you really got my attention when you said all that money now goes elsewhere.
Yes.
Whether it's the provincial headquarter or the
licensed
federal.
producers too,
Yeah.
because the licensed producers are more or less located in larger centers. And if you're purchasing online through them, the money is going back to wherever they're located.
And then there's the question of
Well,
what
if you're
big...
purchasing at all, you have to purchase from a licensed producer, right?
Well, yes and no. So in BC, they're allowing public and private retail. So we have to purchase all of our products through the Liquor Distribution Board in BC. So the licensed producers will be selling to the Liquor Distribution Board.
This is still the economic question. What happens if big corporations sniff around and say, "Oh, we're not in that. We should go make money there"?
Well,
Then
they're already there.
They are there.
Oh,
It's all about big business right now. The way that they've laid out and the framework that's been laid out, it's all about big business.